says my mic is on. It also says I'm unstable. I mean, my internet connection is unstable. Is that now going out to the world?
Yes, you're live.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us at the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. Though providing an opportunity for public comment during the Board of Education meetings is not a requirement, the Westerville City School District, WCSD Board of Education, believes it is an important part of its engagement with and accountability to the community. In response to public gathering restrictions now in place due to the coronavirus, and in the spirit of maintaining an opportunity for our public to participate in these virtual school board meetings, we are offering interested persons an opportunity to submit written public comment. During a typical WCSD Board of Education meeting, there are two opportunities for individuals to address the board. While functioning under this virtual meeting environment, the opportunity to submit public comment will open when the meeting begins at approximately 6 p.m. and close shortly after each public comment section is reached on the agenda. Per Board Policy 0169.1, each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 5 minutes duration. When submitting your comments through the provided forms, we ask you to please keep your comments professional, avoid the use of inappropriate language, and refrain from identifying individuals by name in the event of a complaint. You may use the following links to submit written comments for the board's consideration: the link to submit specific agenda item comment, and the link to submit a general nature comment. All comments submitted become a matter of public record and are subject to release under Ohio law and the Federal Freedom of Information Act. As with any in-person public comments made during a traditional school board meeting, members reserve the right to respond immediately or withhold comment in order to conduct appropriate research and follow up with the speaker at a later time. Thank you in advance for your understanding and cooperation. With that, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mr. Velardo?
Here. And if you are able, I invite you to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 4.01. May I have a motion and a second to temporarily suspend Board Policy PO 0169.1, public participation at Board of Education meetings for this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion, questions? Hearing none. Please call the roll, Ms. Marshall.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 5.01. A motion and a second to approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting held October 26, 2020. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved. Second.
Thank you so much. Any discussion, questions? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 6, District Highlights and Recognition 6.01. Spring and Fall 2020 A+ Award winners. This is the awesomeness thing that we get to do. And I would like to turn this over to who? Dr. Kellogg, is this you?
I believe so, President Velardo.
Thank you very much.
So this evening, we get to honor 20 individuals who are the recipients of the Westerville City School District Spring and Fall, we didn't get a chance to do this last spring, A+ Employee Awards. These awards are presented to teachers and support staff who distinguish themselves through a single or ongoing demonstration of exemplary performance. Winners were selected by a committee that included the superintendent, the treasurer, 2 board members, community members, and a parent representative. Tonight's recipients display exceptional performance in support of the district's mission, which is, quote, to prepare students to contribute to the competitive and changing world in which we live, and values which include respect, inclusiveness, community, communication, collaboration, innovation, nurturing, trust, and accountability. Last week, Mr. Velardo, Ms. Marshall, and myself had the opportunity to visit these individuals and present them with their trophies and a copy of the recipient's nomination. So we got to deliver those to people at work last week, and greatly enjoyed getting out there to visit them all. So this evening, Jill Beck, my assistant, has created a wonderful video tribute to those honorees. We'd like to take a few minutes to share that with the board and with the community so we can celebrate these outstanding educators. We're not getting the sound.
I apologize, but I don't think we can hear the sound. Is that correct, board members?
That's correct.
If you wanna pause it, Jill, and retry, we have time. This is important to do. Jill, my understanding is if your audio is muted, we might not be able to hear this.
Introducing the 2020 Westerville City School District's Spring and Fall A-Plus Award winners. A-Plus awards are presented to employees who distinguish themselves through a single or ongoing demonstration of exemplary performance. For Spring 2020 A-Plus award winners, from the Academic Enrichment Center, Amy Anglin. Amy was nominated by Steve Rotar. He shared Amy embodies the district's values of respect, inclusiveness, community, communication, collaboration, innovation, nurturing, trust, and accountability more than anyone else I know in the district. She is the poster child for a team player. She consistently goes the extra mile. She does anything she can to help her students and fellow staff members. She puts all of her heart and soul into everything she does, and it is inspirational. From the Academic Enrichment Center, Brandy Pollins. Brandy was nominated by Scott Ebrecht and 22 other individuals. They shared that Brandy has been a long-time employee in the Department of Assessment, and she has proven time and again to be a team player. She interacts with virtually every employee who supports instructional practices for every student in the district. From preschool through grade 12, Brandy touches every student's academic record. She is compassionate and always has a student's best interest at heart. From Building and Grounds, Jennifer Aaron Holt. Jennifer was nominated by Scott Dorn. He shared Jennifer has been a tremendous asset in the area of school safety. She helped to implement the visitor management control systems throughout our district, taking ownership of the daily use and maintenance of the system, including developing user guides, FAQ documents, and training. We have been given a tremendous gift having Jennifer add to her custodial services tasks the effort and attention needed to make these systems successful. District winner, Kaylee Nestor Baker. Kaylee was nominated by Debbie Pellington. She shared Kaylee works tirelessly to meet the needs of gifted students in Westerville. She has worked to develop a course of study to ensure that gifted students have their academic needs met in the classroom. She started a new parent group for gifted students. Kaylee embodies the district values. She is truly an exceptional leader for the students and their teachers to her coworkers and peers. Kaylee goes above and beyond expectations in support of students. District winner, Angela Heath. Angela was nominated by Kaylee Nestor Baker. Kaylee shared that Angie goes above and beyond to support the teachers and students she works with. She developed a district-wide parent-teacher organization, WINGS, to bring families of gifted students together. Angie's tireless efforts to develop opportunities for inclusiveness, community, and a deeper sense of belonging for our students and families district-wide, while also fostering rich learning opportunities for our students and teachers, truly make her an A-plus educator. District winner, Mark Schwartz. Mark was nominated by Jill Beck. She shares there are so many people who work behind the scenes in a school district who are often the unsung heroes. Mark is one of those heroes. No problem is too big or too small, and he explains the issue in layman terms, and he always goes above and beyond expectations. We couldn't prepare students to contribute in a competitive world without individuals like Mark who help to keep our IT systems going. He is a tech wizard, magician, and A-plus employee. From Emerson Magnet, Jeffrey Milko. Jeff was nominated by parent Nancy Gurgiolo. Ms. Gurgiolo shares, in addition to being an awesome third grade teacher, Mr. Milko leads the only first LEGO League robotics team in the district. The program started 3 years ago and it continues to grow. His enthusiasm for the program and his dedication to the kids has contributed to its success. He is a shining example of going above and beyond. From Huber Ridge Elementary School, Patty Blanchong, nominated by Kristen Robertson. Kristen shared, Patty is someone who exhibits the key phrase team player each and every day. Patty is extremely trustworthy, encouraging, ambitious, and wears many hats. There truly is no one more deserving of an A-plus award than Patty Blanchong. From Huber Ridge Elementary, Ashley Diaz. Ashley was nominated by Sheila Ebrecht and Sarah Edelson. They share she is incredibly dedicated to her students and their families. She focuses on their strengths to help motivate them to do well academically and to develop skills to become respectful community members. She is the ultimate professional, respectful of her colleagues, and is both a leader in the building and in the classroom. From South High School, Rustin Randall. Rustin was nominated by student Catherine Cohen. She shared, each and every day, Mr. Randall motivates all of his students. He never misses a day of school, which is great for students to see. He is understanding and knows the challenges that students face every day that have nothing to do with algebra. He makes a personal connection with each student, and he is the main reason I get excited to come to school. Our Fall 2020 A-plus award winners. From Blendon Middle School, Angelique Crago. Angie was nominated by Philip Sotat, Kathy Benton, and Mel Liston. Philip shared, Mrs. Crago is a great teacher, and science is my favorite class largely because of her. Kathy shares, she does her job with a passion for students that goes beyond a contract or even a calling. Nell shared, she is one of the finest teachers with whom I have worked. She is an ardent advocate for all special needs students. From Central High School, Brian Bishop. Brian was nominated by Amy Ferris. Amy shared, Brian and his entire team have been heroes in making teachers and students safe at Westerville Central High School this year. He has developed great relationships with teachers and students. Students all know his name, and he is able to break down barriers and make their day even better. He is an exceptional member of the Warhawk team. From Huber Ridge Elementary School, Tyson Hilkert. Tyson was nominated by Kristen Robertson. She shares, since last March, I've stood in awe of Tyson's leadership. In the midst of all the uncertainty surrounding us, he stood the course and focused on what we could somewhat control. As we progressed into August, many were feeling apprehensive about the upcoming school year. He was a listener and a cheerleader. But without his leadership and determination, we would not be where we are today. From Huber Ridge Elementary School, Tanya Barton. Tanya was nominated by parent Christy Sherwood and Patty Black-Chong. Christy shares, educating and sharing everything she learns to help her students and staff in today's environment while they are at Huber Ridge Elementary is extremely important from a parent's point of view. Patty shares, in a nutshell, Tanya makes us all feel safe. She's incredibly calm in the wake of stressful situations, a voice of reason with an extremely tender, serving heart. From Mark Twain Elementary, Kelly Knapp. Kelly was nominated by Serena Cassell and Vicky Moss. They share, Kelly has a great passion for supporting students in all areas. She works closely with WARM and the Westerville Christian Church to ensure we get enough food to help all families in need. Kelly works as an attendance clerk, but she's done so much more for our students to support them on a daily basis. She's always happy and positive and gets an A+ with us. From McVeigh Elementary School, Jason Fullen. Jason was nominated by Jim Swain. He shares, this fall, Mr. Fullen has really stepped up again as we began exploring how we wanted to address the social issues of our country today. He took a strong lead in suggesting books for individuals to read as well as videos to watch in an effort to gain a deeper understanding of the challenges minorities face in our country still today. In everything that Mr. Fullen does, his compassion for others and natural leadership shine through. From North High School, Brian Johnson. Brian was nominated by parent Kelly Krantz and Nikki Dunbar. Kelly shares, his tireless engagement and positive leadership ensures all are included. He finds a place for all members of the football family. He is a winner on and off the field, and he is shaping lives for those who play at a higher level and those whose football career ends in high school. Nikki shared, his students trust him and they know that they can depend on him if they are struggling with school, life, football, etc. Mr. Johnson is an A+ human. From Point View Elementary School, Tanya Mariscal. Tanya was nominated by parent Kelly Ogletree. Kelly shared, starting new things is difficult for my son. Mrs. Mariscal took so many extra steps to make sure that all students were ready for this adventure. The 2021 school year is one we will all remember well due to such unusual circumstances. This school year will also be one that our family remembers because it's such an amazing start to the school year, all thanks to an amazing first grade teacher, Mrs. Tanya Mariscal. From South High School, Mark Schmidley. Mark was nominated by Mike Kinsey. Mike shares, Westerville South has a strong and collaborative science department. Mr. Schmidley makes every single student feel supported and welcomed. We are lucky to have a great group of teachers at Westerville South. One of our best is Mark Schmidley. He is inspiring and welcoming to his students, collaborative with colleagues, and helpful to the entire school. He is a great representation of what it means to be an A+ educator. From Transportation, Kevin McNeil. Kevin was nominated by Steve Massey. Steve shares, Kevin exemplifies the spirit of the A+ award. I had the opportunity to ride along with him during his bus route last spring before COVID forced us to operate for the most part remotely. He knows and interacts with each family and child with mutual admiration being evident. In speaking with Kevin during our time together, he does not have to work. This is truly a labor of love for him. He expressed to me how he tells folks that the students provide him with a satisfaction that cannot be measured. Congratulations to this year's 2020 Spring and Fall A+ Award winners. Thank you to everyone who took time to nominate these deserving individuals.
Thank you, Jill, for putting that together and giving us the opportunity to honor those great individuals. It was a real pleasure, although it kind of made people nervous when the board president, superintendent, and treasurer walk in your classroom unannounced, but I think we made it a joyful event. So congratulations to all the award winners, to all of those who took time to nominate. We had over 40 nominations this fall, which is just phenomenal. It just tells you how much people appreciate the hard work going on here. So thank you to everyone who participated in that activity.
Tremendous. And yes, a big thank you to Jill behind the scenes, putting that together, narrating it, and so on. Thank you, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, for letting me go this past week for the fall and spring award winners. That was just a lot of fun, and they were very excited. And I love the fact that it is so often they are nominated by a teacher can be nominated by a student, can be nominated by a fellow educator, somebody that they work with and walk with very closely are people that are trying to recognize the good work that they do. So that's just awesome. Anybody else want to just offer a word or two? I mean, it's Yes, big applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's great. That's great. Okay, thank you for taking time to do that. Moving on to agenda item 7, reports. We have 7.01, a superintendent's update. Dr. Kellogg, that would be you.
Back again. Thank you, President Velardo, members of the board. Just a couple of quick updates on some of the things going on in the district. Want to start, of course, with the obvious one, COVID, and where we are with our response. As you know, we put out communication at the end of last week where we're going to extend the week after Thanksgiving break as another remote week. Couple of things I think should recognize. That was triggered by Franklin County moving to purple. Unfortunately, it's the first county that has gone purple. So that triggered us to go back to our game plan, which says at level 4, purple, that the district will consider moving to remote. We took a look at our numbers and made that decision to kind of chunk the problem and see where we are after that 2-week time period, one of those weeks being Thanksgiving. I was looking at our data late this afternoon. That's on our district website. I encourage people to keep an eye on that if they're looking for district level data. We are seeing right now 31 active staff cases with 103 active student cases. 63 of those come from high school. And a lot of that's tied to the athletic programs. We've talked about that before. And just the age of the students. Quarantines, at this point, staff, we have 78 staff members quarantined, which means between the active cases among staff and the quarantines, we have about 109 staff. That's more than teachers, by the way, who are currently quarantined. Our student quarantine numbers actually dropped a little bit from last week. We'd gotten into the high 600s. As of this afternoon, we're down to 561. Again, 220 of those are tied to high school, which is about 40% of our quarantine cases, which is not unusual as we look at the data relative to age groups. Amongst school-age children overall, the active case rate's fairly low compared to the total population. But as the kids get older, you tend to see higher rates. The area that's starting to cause us more tension would be our district level data, particularly student attendance. And in that one, as we look at the last 2 to 3 weeks, we're starting to see a slow uptick, which is part of our trigger for why we thought a week of remote when we come back from Thanksgiving will be warranted. Staff attendance still is running about what we would like to see. It does still create class coverage problems at times, as we're still struggling to fill classrooms at times. But people in the buildings are doing their very best to keep things operational. Same things in transportation, other places. What also triggers our move is 2 factors. One is you talk to health department officials. The numbers we're seeing right now may very well be an underrepresentation of the real numbers because the contact tracing and catching up on some of those things is slowing things down. So we may see in the rearview mirror some of these numbers were underrepresented from what the actual numbers were. And then the most important one that really caused us to give strong consideration to moving to remote for that additional week is the hospitalizations. I was reading this evening that in Ohio, the hospitalization rate has increased 59% in 2 weeks. So our hospitals are starting to feel the pressure. And that's where we want to be careful that our operations aren't going to impact that. The other thing I want to address, and there were several emails regarding this that came to me since the decision, because of the additional week closure remote for that week after Thanksgiving, that affects cohort B, which obviously creates an imbalance in the number of in-school days versus remote days in our blended model. And there's been questions about will we balance that? And I think it would be premature for us to make any changes at this point because it's possible that the move to remote that we did for the week after Thanksgiving could get extended. We recognize that may need to be extended further as we get closer to winter break. And or even if we move back to blended, it's possible sometime in the future we have to make a shift again that affects one of the cohorts. So we understand that imbalance exists now. I think this would be the wrong time to try and adjust for it and change all the schedules and then maybe have that happen again. So we'll take a look at that one as the weeks unfold and look to see how we might address that imbalance moving forward. There were three public comments that came in this evening from community members regarding our decision. I'll acknowledge, as we see this all the time, there are community members who feel like the move to remote was unjustified, and there's people who think our move to remote is justified and or should be extended further than what we've done. And I recognize that. I think we kind of picked a sweet spot of, let's take that first week from Thanksgiving, see how the call for stay at home, the call for people to be more consistent with their mitigation strategies, particularly wearing masks and isolating themselves, impacts the data, particularly the hospital data, as we move forward. So any questions or comments from the board regarding COVID and where we're at before I move to another topic?
Yes. Real quick question for you. One of the things that I am hearing from some parents has to do with the rate of infection among school-age children being much lower than it is in the general population. And so they question why it is that we go remote when, according to the numbers, being in school could be the safest place for our children to be. Could you kind of speak to how we handle that?
Yeah, I think that that is the case, that the argument can be made that case rates among school-age children is lower than the general population, even as this increase occurs. The other piece of that, though, is that we have adults that work with those children that are also more susceptible to being infected amongst our teaching staff and our other staff. So that creates a problem. In addition, as this data that we're seeing may lag and it may actually be worse than we're seeing, that may play into what we see as a school district down the line. And just this hospitalization piece, the community spread is high. We picked a time period in which we knew we were going to be remote for these first 2 days before the Thanksgiving break, and then added 5 more days to make it essentially a 14-day window when you count the weekend. So we feel like that provides some buffer for us to see where we are as a community and where we are as a school district. But I think to that point, recently we've remained in blended as numbers have increased because we felt that the infection rate amongst school-age children was low, and looking at our attendance data for our student and staff, knowing that all along on the staff side, we have been very close on several days to having to make a tough call because we couldn't cover. So we think this is a good opportunity to take a breath, see how this recent increase affects us, affects the community, and make our next decision as we head towards winter break.
Thank you.
Any other questions or?
I have a quick one. So since we'll be remote, how are we going to track, I guess, the student health data, right, when they're not in school? Because when they're in school, we get certain types of data about them. So to make the decision to come back, right, we need to know how the students are doing. So how do we track that when they're remote?
Well, we've, in our communication, put out to families that we would ask that they continue to update us with their health information. We also, of course, depending on what that health information is, it may come to us from the health department. Part of my concern with the health department right now is, as you talk to them, they're pretty overloaded. And so they're starting to get backlogged. So we would encourage families that are listening this evening or to share with family members, if you have something with one of your students that it's going to impact our data, we'd like to know that so we can continue to make sure that that data is accurate as possible. I do appreciate people in the communities paying attention and asking the questions, looking at the data. I would continue to advise us to do that. We continue to talk to the health departments. We continue to listen to the state of Ohio and what recommendations are there. It all continues to boil down to the same thing. This has become a concentrated at the local level decision. And Franklin County, Franklin County, it's almost redundant to say Franklin County, frankly. Franklin County sits at purple. And that data is more concerning than in some other parts of the state, and it's trending poorly for what we need. So we appreciate everybody's patience and perseverance and understand the frustration that this creates for our families at this time. And we're hopeful that people are consistent with the messages about staying at home and continuing those mitigation strategies and being wise so that we can reestablish ourselves back in blended. We prefer having the kids in the building. That's where we prefer to have them. With that, I'll move on. Just to update, we did have the first meeting of the district equity team. We have another one coming up on December 7th. Right now, we're organizing that group around work teams, around target areas that we have as part of the key targets that the board reviewed. And our building teams are in place and operational. So our movement regarding the equity piece of our district is plugging along. I'm very excited to see the team that we met with. The district equity team has some really passionate and committed people. I think we're going to do some great work in the future over the long term. So thank you to those people participating. We will continue to publicize what we're working on and where our goals go as we move along. So December 7th is our next meeting. And then lastly, we are real close to gaining occupancy at the phase 1 part of South. Very excited about that. Hopefully some of you have gotten to see the video that was part of the Mike Kinsey tour that was part of a This Week news article recently. He did a fabulous job walking backwards and giving a tour of the building with great energy. The staff there is excited. One of the A+ award recipients we visited is moving to the new wing and had their stuff packed up, ready to go for the grand opening. So we're excited about that. We still have some boxes to check with some folks, I believe tomorrow, but hopeful to gain occupancy and then make that transition. And that project, the phase 1 piece, will have been successful getting it done on time and on budget, and opening the door to phase 2 along the project. So looking forward to that. And then this evening, I know I won't steal Mr. Dorn's thunder, but he's going to present to you where we are with boundary planning and the opportunity for community involvement in that. And I would encourage people who are vested in that process, who want to know more about it, take a look at what we have online, take a look at the opportunity for community input, and I'll leave it at that. Mr. Dorn can explain more about that process. So any other questions from the board on equity team or where we are with South? Awesome.
Any others? Hearing none. Dr. Kellogg, thank you very much. Some good information, certainly important information regarding our COVID situation and the up and running district equity team. I was able to be a part of that first meeting and really saw a lot of energy in the Zoom room. So it was good. That's good stuff. Moving on to Mr. Dorn, our realignment update. Dr. Kellogg served you up.
Good evening. President Velardo, Vice President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. Tonight, I am providing you with an update of where we are in the process to realign the elementary and middle school boundaries. Although the primary intent is to give you the update, I have also included some context for those who are watching this evening, those who might need a little more background. Next slide. Let's begin with the origin of the process. The district convened a community committee in 2017 to provide recommendations to the superintendent and the board regarding a 10-year facility master plan. Following a thorough review of enrollment forecasts and other data, one of the recommendations was to build a new middle school and a new elementary school to support projected enrollment growth and address capacity concerns at our existing schools. Voters approved a ballot issue in November of 2019 to fund the first phase of identified projects. The new elementary school is currently under construction in the Minerva Park area and scheduled to open in the fall of 22. The new middle school is in the design phase and scheduled to open in the fall of 23. The realignment of school boundaries is happening now to give families enough time to consider and plan for these changes before they take effect in the 22 and 23 school years respectively. Next slide. At this time last year, we were in the planning phase of the overall process. We worked on the revisions to both policy and charge. We garnered initial community feedback and prepared materials for the committees. The board approved the policy and charge in early 2020, and the committee work sessions began right after that. The committees met both combined and independently. Early on, the meetings were in person, but when the district moved to remote learning in the spring, the committee work was suspended indefinitely. The original target for board action for realignment was this past October. However, due to the ongoing pandemic, when the committee work was able to resume this fall, the meetings were conducted through the Zoom platform. We are thankful for those who were able to continue their participation through this platform, as we know it has been very challenging at times. At this time, the committees have a work product that they would like the community's feedback on before they make their final recommendations in January. Once we have feedback, the committees will return to work in January prior to providing their final recommendation to the superintendent and the board. It is anticipated that the first reading will be in early February. The new boundaries for the elementary schools will take effect in the fall of 2022 with the opening of the new elementary school, and the new boundaries for the middle school will take effect in the fall of 2023 with the opening of the new middle school. Next slide, please. This is the membership of the Elementary School Realignment Committee. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was able to see who was on each committee. Next slide, please. This is the membership of the Middle School Realignment Committee. You'll notice that both committees have both school staff and community members on it, as well as one Board of Education member who serves as an observer for both of those, and Mr. Villardo. And if you feel like there's anything you would like to interject, since you've been able to witness this, and Mr. Davidson, if you see anything in here tonight that you would like to add to, feel free to interrupt and add in. Next slide, please. The superintendent established a plan development committee to support the realignment committees. In addition to providing requested data and responding to questions from the committees, the Plan Development Committee is also charged with making sure each committee's recommendation meets the board policy and charge. You'll note that we have our two administrative co-facilitators highlighted here, Mr. Reeves and Ms. Wallace. They are the conduit of information back from the committees to the Plan Development Committee. Next slide, please. Presented here are some highlights of Policy 7110 and the committee's charge that impacted their considerations for changing boundaries. Walking distances for students who live near several possible schools of attendance, accommodating expected enrollment growth, the effect of boundary changes on each school's demographics, and limiting the impact of boundary changes by keeping as many neighborhoods and school relationships intact as possible. Next slide, please. There are two phases of community engagement that are helping to shape the committee boundary recommendations. The first phase of committee engagement used an online tool called Thought Exchange to collect feedback on one question. Participants also had the ability to rate their level of agreement with the feedback shared by others. Those top rated results will be shared over the next several screens. The second phase was intended to be in-person gallery walks. However, with our current concerns with large group gatherings, we have created an electronic version of a gallery walk for our community to review and provide their feedback to the current work products of the committees. The presentation is currently available on our website. In a little bit, you'll have be able to see the web address for those. Through this morning, the presentation was viewed more than 600 times, and we have already over 100 submissions of feedback to provide to the committees in January. We certainly believe this will only increase as more of our community are able to review the materials over this time period. Next slide, please. This represents a summary of the highest rated thoughts of all respondents participating in the initial thought exchange. I'll give you a chance to take a glance at these. Next slide, please. This screen represents the top thoughts of parents and guardians. What I think you'll see here developing is a theme between all of these groups. And if we move on to the next slide, this screen represents the top thoughts of employees. Give you a chance to take a look at those. Next slide, please. This screen represents the highest rated thoughts of employees that also have children enrolled in the district, a slightly different perspective. Next slide, please. And this screen represents the top thoughts of community members at large. So there were quite a few thoughts, but we did notice a couple of themes develop. And if we go to the next slide, the two significant themes that emerged from the initial thought exchange for the committee's consideration were neighborhoods and their proximity to school buildings and travel time on school transportation. Regarding neighborhoods and their proximity to schools, we must note that even with the addition of the 2 new buildings, there are more students living in the southern end of the district than there is capacity in all of the schools located there. Committee members also had to consider that there would be schools in close proximity to one another that have large capacities, but not enough students living in the neighborhoods where those schools are located to fill them. With regard to travel time, for those who use our buses or other school transportation, a need to transport students from the southern end of the district north will still exist based on the capacity of the buildings on the southern end. Next slide, please. So where to begin? Each committee received current attendance boundaries and 2 potential starting points for their work. Middle school starting points were designed first. They were based upon filling the school through either proximity and building demographic data or just proximity. Once the 2 starting points for the middle school were determined, then the elementary school boundary options were drawn with attention to alignment with the middle school. Existing elementary and middle school boundary lines were then adjusted to meet capacity targets and keep as many existing neighborhoods and school relationships intact as possible. And the committee members were given the option to use either starting point or to disregard them, and disregard the starting points in general and start from scratch. They opted to use the starting points that had been created using both proximity and building demographic data profiles. Each committee's work then entailed adjusting and improving those boundary starting points based on the board policy in charge. Next slide. On the next several slides, you're going to see the current work products of the committees that are being presented for community feedback. You will also see how the community has access to additional information that will help them review this work and provide feedback. Next slide. This image is an overview of the Middle School Realignment Committee's work product. The next screen will provide larger graphics followed by a screen highlighting the matching building demographic profiles. The graphic on the left, and also on the next slide, the graphic on the left represents our current boundaries. The graphic on the right represents the current work product of our committees. Next slide, please. A printable version of these maps, other support information, and the link to provide feedback on proposed middle school boundaries is available online at that web address that you can see on the screen. Community members can access these materials and take some time to review the current recommendations before providing feedback this way. Notice that both graphics use a similar color coding for each building. The new middle school is represented in pink. The map on the right only highlights the areas where students live. It does not include the commercial areas and parks that are shown in the maps on the left. That's why the maps look a little bit different. The next screen will provide building demographic profile data for this current work product. Next slide, please. This table compares the middle school building demographic profiles for the 2019-2020 school year to what the building demographic profiles would look like with the current recommended boundary lines and the same student population. A printable version of this document is also available online. So what we're seeing in the 2019-2020 column is last year's actual data from our official October count, and the column on the far right is what was currently being proposed through this work product for each of these buildings. Next slide, please. Here's the address to download the middle school boundary lines documents and the link to provide feedback. The window to provide feedback to the committee is November 16th through December 7th. Again, this 3-week window is in place of the originally 4 planned in-person gallery walks. Next slide. This image is an overview of the Elementary School Realignment Committee's work product. The next screen will provide, again, larger graphics followed by a screen highlighting the matching building demographic profiles. Again, we used a similar color coding system to make sure that it was easier to see what kind of changes have happened. Again, the map on the right only shows areas where students, where there are homes and residents. The map on the left appears to be more full because it also includes commercial areas and parks. Next slide, please. On this map, you can see, next slide, please. On this slide, you can see the web address to provide feedback for the elementary school lines. Again, in this map, we use the same pink color to show the new elementary school, the attendance zone for that. A printable version of these maps, other support information, and the link to provide feedback on proposed elementary school boundaries is available at that web address. Community members can access these materials and take some time to review the current recommendations before providing feedback. The next screen provides building demographic data. Next screen, please. This table compares the elementary school building demographic profiles for 2019-2020 school year to what the building demographic profiles would look like with the current recommended boundaries. So this one takes a little bit more, you need to spend a little bit more time taking a look at this data and understanding the 2019-2020 column. So that second column from the right, 2019-2020, that column represents last year's actual data for those buildings. If you notice, our magnet schools are not included in here because they don't have homeschool boundaries, right? Students elect to attend the magnet program. Same with the gifted and all-day kindergarten at Longfellow. What's proposed does not take that into account. We wouldn't know which students would have to be pulled out for a magnet or something, you know, for one of those other programs. So for example, Hawthorne is showing 768 students. Last year, Hawthorne had 768 students in their school, but they had 901 students within their boundaries. 133 students either went to Hanby, Emerson, or Longfellow, or open enrolled to another building, or were overflowed out of Hawthorne. So That's the 2019 column. It's the actuals. The proposed does not take into account students leaving to go to those programs because we cannot make that calculation.
Hey, Scott, can you just, I shouldn't say, hey, Scott, excuse me, Mr. Dorn, could you take a look at the McVeigh notation you have there and just explain that to people? They may not know about those housing developments.
Yes, we currently have two major developments going in on the east side of the reservoir. Right now, I think one of them is in the Mark Twain area and the other would be in the McVeigh area. However, if we made these adjustments, both of them would be in the McVeigh attendance area. We anticipate possibly 70, it's an estimate, so maybe 70 students coming from those two developments on the other side of the reservoir, and our committee members needed to remember that so that they could factor in that for future growth. We do anticipate, I think, about a 7% growth across the district over this 10-year forecast outside of that new development, but they had to sort of weigh both of those components as they tried to identify how many students to put into each school.
Thanks, Scott. Sometimes it's important to point that out. If you are really Westerville centric, you're just kind of like viewing the core of Westerville and not looking at the boundaries that we have, you will sometimes mistakenly assume we're kind of built out. And Westerville City School District boundaries are in fact really not built out yet. And that's what those two new developments represent, for example.
Next slide. Again, here's the web address for the elementary school boundary proposal. So our community can log into this web address and print the documents, and also they will find at this address the tool to provide their feedback. Next questions? Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Dorn at this point? Tracy, you want to say anything about your involvement in the elementary side? I mean, just a kind of word to the community about how that's going for us.
I'm just so grateful for the community members and staff members that have put so much time and effort into this and have been really thoughtful about the choices made. Mm-hmm. We actually added an extra meeting because there were some questions. So I just, I want to say thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the time. And as much as we can get this information out so our community members can weigh in, I would appreciate. Thank you.
And I would just echo that. I didn't mean to call on you and not let you know ahead of time, but I knew that it's been a really good experience for us. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Dorn, for the idea of posting all of this material on the website that is not only viewable, but printable. So we would encourage people to go to it, print it, study it a little bit, and see if they have any questions, comments. We would love to hear from you. Mr. Dorn, thank you very much for a solid report and for the way, frankly, for the way you are leading this effort, as well as all of the team behind the scenes.
Can I ask just one?
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you. Mr. Dorn, I know it's in the materials online, but just for anybody who might be watching, can you summarize, so from here, moving forward, right, how sort of what the timeline is for this feedback from the community to be wrapped in and where we're going to end up? Could you just run us through that again real fast, please? Thank
Absolutely. So the feedback window is open it's open now through December 7th. When we close that window, we're going to take the information that came from the tool along with the information that has come in through email or other conversations, and we're going to assemble that for our committees so that they can take some time to review it. So we would like to get them the feedback prior to going to winter break. So we'll spend some time putting that together in a package that's hopefully usable for them. They'll have that over break and then at the beginning of January to review and see how that feedback changes the way they view their current work. There'll be a meeting in January. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in front of me, but there is a meeting. It's about mid-January where the committees will come together. They will have a chance to then discuss their thoughts on the feedback and their current work product, make recommendations for changes. I'm sure we'll probably see some of those. Make recommendations for changes, make their final recommendations then to be presented to the board. So the recommendations will be presented to the board at the first board meeting in February, which tentatively I think is February 8th right now. I think you still have to set your schedule, but that's what we're thinking it might be. And so there'll be the first reading, and then there'll be some time for further feedback from the community before the second reading and the board takes action.
Thank you for walking through that. It's really helpful.
Any other questions, comments for Mr. Dorn? Hearing none. Mr. Dorn, thank you very much. Solid report and a lot of really good work, and a big shout out to Scott Reeves and Barb Wallace as well, who have full plates and yet are really leading this effort in the middle and elementary school side. So thank you all. Moving on to agenda item 8, public comments pertaining to action items. We are going to bring the public comments to the fore at the later public comment section. And next up, agenda item 9, financials, 9.01, a 5-year forecast. This is just a little thing that Ms. Marshall does for us. Just a little thing. Now we need a motion and a second, please, for this.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. And I tease because this is a massive effort for Ms. Marshall, and we are appreciative. So take it away.
Thank you, President Velardo, members of the board. So tonight we're going over the November forecast, which is due to ODE by November the 30th. Jill, can you go to the first slide, please? So the purpose of the forecast, we've talked about this in the past. I just like to remind everybody that it is considered a valuable long-range planning tool, and it does serve as our basis for signing the district's 412 certificate, which is the certificate of available resources for things like appropriations and contracts. And it also is to provide the Ohio Department of Education a method for which they can identify districts that are headed towards financial difficulties. So next slide, please. The requirements of the forecast. So we have to file an initial projection no later than November 30th, which is what we're doing tonight with ODE. So with the board's consideration, if it's approved tonight, I'll file that with ODE tomorrow. And then we have to include the current fiscal year, which is fiscal year 21, and the ensuing 4 fiscal years through fiscal year 25. We also like to include 3 years actual information for historical purposes. And then we have to update the 5-year projections no later than May 31st each year with ODE. So we'll be back in the spring doing this all over again. So next slide, please. The forecast, I like to look at it in 3 separate sections. I think that helps. Important to remember, it does only include the district's general operating fund. We look at revenue in lines 1.01 through 2.08. Expenditures are lines 3.01 through 5.05. And our balances, changes in balances and reserves are 6.01 through 15.01. So that's a handy little numbering system there as you're going through and looking at it. Next slide, please. So important to point out, I think, is that the projections we are discussing today are based on the information that we have available to us today to the best of our ability, and that, that very well may change going forward. There's a lot of variables that go into a 5-year forecast, especially when we're heading into a biennium budget season, which we will be doing in the spring. The current challenges are state funding, which we'll talk a little bit more about, property tax collections, and then federal funding. Next slide, please. So looking at revenues overall, we do anticipate increases in revenues over the 5-year period, and that's mostly due to property tax changes. So our voters passed issue 8 in November of 2019, and that provides for additional tax revenue to begin in calendar year 21. So for fiscal year 21, that's half a year collections, and then for fiscal year 22 is when we see a full year collection starting. So the difference between this forecast and the last forecast that the board approved back in May, which is, in the middle of the spring when we were in the middle of the pandemic, is we've changed our assumptions for property tax collection rates, and also we've changed our assumptions for state funding, and a change in our interest revenue projections. So we'll talk a little bit about those later on in the forecast. Next slide, please. So this is just a couple of charts that I like to look at to see where we are in terms of what percentage we collect for each revenue type. So for local property taxes in fiscal year 20, we collected about 61% of our revenue came from local property taxes. About 31% came from state through state foundation and other reimbursements. And then projected for fiscal year 25 in the current forecast is the local property taxes to be about 67% and state funding to be about 29%. And this forecast does assume flat funding with the state foundation, so that definitely affects those percentages. Next slide, please. So looking at local property taxes, in fiscal year 21, it's projected to be 64% of total revenues. The collection rate is typically around 99%, and it's anticipated to be slightly reduced due to the pandemic. Back in May, we looked at the recession levels that we had for collection rates, and so this has been updated. The forecast in May, which we'll talk a little bit more about, was projecting 95% collection rates. This forecast assumes, based on what we've collected this fall from both Franklin and Delaware counties, that our collection rate to be 98%, and that's for fiscal years 21 and 22. So collection rates didn't come in as low as what we had anticipated originally. And then back to 99% for fiscal years 23 through 25. So that's a significant difference from what we had in the May forecast. Just a reminder, the 5.9 mil operating levy that was approved by voters in 2019, I've circled in yellow there when that goes into effect. So the half year collections, because it was delayed a calendar year to calendar year 21, half year collections you'll see in fiscal year 21, full year starts in fiscal year 22. Tangible personal property taxes, they're about 2% of total revenues, and those are, we expect slight increases from growth in the new operating levy. The next slide, please. So this is the comparison just to show the difference between our projections in May, where we were, and then our projections today. So in the May forecast, we assumed a 95% collection rate in fiscal year 21 through 22, and then a slight increase in that collection rate for each of the 3 years going forward. Well, it would have been the 2 years going forward from that point. For the November forecast, we've bumped that up to 98% for fiscal year 21 and 22. So the table on the top right side shows the difference in the numbers, and that's in millions of dollars if you multiply that out. And the graph down on the bottom left, I'm sorry, I don't have a cursor or a pointer here, but the graph on the bottom left-hand side, that's just a graphical display to show you what the differences are between what we're projecting now for November and what we were projecting back in May. So we're in much better shape than where we thought we might be when we were in the midst of just starting the pandemic. So next slide, please. state foundation and reimbursements. Excuse me. So our current biennium budget is fiscal years 20 and 21. And so that was part of House Bill 166 that was approved by the legislature. And so what that provided for was essentially flat funding from the state based on the 2019 levels. We were already underfunded. I like to remind everybody, the state has never fully funded us for any funding formula that's been in place. As of 2019, we were underfunded by $11.5 million due to the capped funding from the state. And so that number that was already underfunded was originally anticipated based on what was approved by the legislature for House Bill 166 to be flat funding through fiscal year 21. The current forecast includes 2 new budget cycles, so we'll have a new biennium budget for fiscal years 22 and 23, and then again a new biennium budget for fiscal years 24 and 25. This forecast assumes the same funding model through fiscal year 25, with the cuts based off of the 2019 levels, plus the cuts from the spring. So I have a slide, I think, that will help explain that a little bit. It also assumes a 50% decrease in casino revenue for the current fiscal year. And that's just due to the casinos were closed to the pandemic. I'm not even completely sure if they're fully opened at this point, but I do think that they're back a little bit. And then property tax allocations. So those are reimbursements and direct payments from the state for property tax rollback and homestead exemptions. So the rollback went away on new levies after 2013, but we still can receive those reimbursements from older levies. And so these estimates follow property tax estimates, and this forecast assumes that that allocation will remain exempt from future cuts at the state level. But, you know, that's always a possibility too that the state could do. Let's hope they don't. Next slide, please. So I get a lot of questions about trying to understand the cuts that we saw last spring from the state. So House Bill 166, like we talked about earlier, for the current biennium budget, provided for flat funding based on the 2019 levels. In the spring, I think it was April sometime, DeWine came out and said that he was going to cut over $600 million from the K-12 budget for the current year due to the pandemic. And so Westerville saw a reduction in state funding of $2.8 million. So in 2019, our foundation formula, we received $44.73 million. In 2020, we were told that we were going to receive $44.73 million, and the same thing for 21 as part of House Bill 166. With DeWine's cuts that happened in the spring, that number is now $41.95 million for fiscal year 20. That's what we received. And then going into fiscal year 21, they've continued that reduced amount into 21. So that's what I mean when I say the state has cut a total of $5.6 million from our revenues, because that's the amount of revenue that we have lost due to those cuts. And as of today, the state could still make additional cuts, you know, for the rest of the fiscal year. We don't anticipate that they will. This forecast doesn't assume that they will, but that is always a possibility. You know, they came in April last year and cut us $2.8 million, so that's always a possibility. But this forecast does assume that we'll continue at the $41.95 million amount. Next slide, please. So this is a change in our assumptions from the May forecast. So the May forecast assumed that in addition to the $2.8 million cut that we saw in fiscal year 20, that was equal to about a 6% cut for the district in funding. The May forecast assumed that we would see a 10% cut in fiscal year 21 in the current fiscal year. So far, that cut is still the 6% that we saw in 20. At the time, the state was telling different state departments to anticipate 10 to 20% cuts for fiscal year 21. And so that's why we projected that in the May forecast. So November, this assumes that we have flat funding from the FY20 amounts, the fiscal year 20 amounts through fiscal year 25. The only increase to that, it does go up a little bit, and that's just from the casino revenue because we saw such a sharp decline in 21. But that casino revenue is outside of the foundation formula, but still part of the unrestricted grants line. So if you look at the graph over on the bottom left side there, the green is our May forecast. So you could see we anticipated an additional cut in 21, and then we had gradual increases going forward. So the current forecast, we have essentially flat funding from 20 going into 21, and then essentially flat funding going out through the remaining forecast years. So again, also much better than what we were projecting back in May. Next slide, please. The other piece to House Bill 166 was the Student Wellness and Success Funds. So this is money that was through the biennium budget that is outside of the district's general operating account. It's accounted for, it's restricted revenue and is accounted for in Fund 467. And so it's not included in the forecast. For fiscal year 20, we received about $1.2 million. And then fiscal year 21, we actually saw an increase in our allocation of about $300,000 to $400,000 from the fiscal year 21 number. And we are anticipating that this funding will continue through at least fiscal year 23. So Governor DeWine has stated publicly on several occasions that he will not sign a budget that does not include the Student Wellness and Success Funds. So I think based on his comments, it's safe to assume that those will continue at least through the end of his first term, which is what this forecast does. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So all other revenues, so this includes a little bit of everything, payments in lieu of taxes, Board of Revision settlements, interest revenue, tuition, student fees, and other miscellaneous receipts. So we do anticipate decreases in interest revenue, pilot payments, tuition, and rent. Interest rates have decreased significantly due to the pandemic. I think I'm pretty sure at this point, everything that we had invested has been called and then invested at lower yields due to the dropping interest rates. Rent revenue has decreased significantly, and that's because we aren't renting our buildings out to people anymore. And then all-day kindergarten tuition, we're charging 50% while we're in a blended model, and we charge nothing while we're in a remote model. The all other financing sources include a refund of prior year expenditures. Fiscal year 20 is just the BWC refunds and prior year reimbursements from Medicaid. In fiscal year 21, the Bureau of Workers' Compensation increased significantly the refunds. So we're actually receiving $2.5 million. That's usually around $500,000, which is about the amount that we pay in a premium every year. And so for the last 4 years, that's what we've received. Fiscal year 21, there will be a one-time refund of $2.5 million. We received $500,000 in October. We're supposed to get another $2 million in December, and that's part of their $5 billion give back. They said that this will be a one-time refund. We will not see these going forward after this point, is what they're communicating to employers. So that's to help offset the revenue losses that we're seeing due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So revenue uncertainty, state funding, the cuts made in 20, cuts expected to be made in 21. We've already realized those cuts. Hopefully we don't see more cuts in the current year. The new biennium budget, the Cup-Patterson Fair School Funding Plan. So I think this is important to us. We want to encourage people to support the Fair School Funding Plan. It's currently House Bill 305. There's also a companion Senate Bill 376 that's in front of the Senate. The hope is that this would be approved, signed into law before the beginning of the new year. There's a chance that could happen. Of course, it would take, I think, a lot of support from various people to make that happen. But they're working on it. Dr. Kellogg and I recently testified to the House Finance Committee. We're hoping to have an opportunity next week, I think, to testify to the Senate Finance Committee. And so just hoping a lot. So I think it's important that people contact their senators, especially, but their legislators altogether, to support this. So the state recently put out simulations for this. I think it's important to understand the simulations that the state put out most recently were fully funding that plan. This does have a phase-in period of 6 years. So if it does pass, no, we're not going to get $14.6 million in 1 year. That is slated to be phased in over a 6-year period.
Could I emphasize that, Ms. Marshall, just really quickly? This is the last several things she has said. I think the board would concur. This is, well, everything she has said has been important.
No, that's
but the last few things she has said is really important. If you, community members, et cetera, staff, are concerned about the funding levels being cut and or the funding levels not being fully funded, because it's one thing to have a funding formula, but it's another thing to not fund that funding formula. So regarding the Cup-Patterson, for example, I would, I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, but I am sure that the board would say, please contact your representatives if you are wanting a clear demonstration of support and not cutting for public education. The Cup-Patterson bill has been through many hands and many people in the education world who understand what it is all about. And I am not one to speak negatively about representatives, senators, et cetera. They're trying to do their work like we're trying to do our work. I fully get that. But I would encourage you, community members, staff, to contact, particularly perhaps our Senate representatives. I believe that would be Brenner and Meharath. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. Am I pronouncing that correctly? I would encourage some just texts, some phone calls, some emails to those folks and say, we want to support public education. Thank you. I just really, I don't think we can highlight enough that the Fair School Funding Plan is a solid direction to go, and a funding plan has to be funded to be effective no matter the plan. So I said I would speak briefly. I did not, so I will stop here. Thank you, Ms. Marshall.
Thank you, President Velardo. Those are absolutely important points. And if anyone is interested in getting involved in writing letters to the legislators, we are happy to send information besides our own representatives and senators here in the district. There's a whole committee on the Senate Finance Committee that it would be good to send a few emails to, and calls and texts and those sorts of things. So we're happy to do that. So the other part to revenue uncertainty, besides not knowing what state funding will look like, is our property values. So, you know, right now we have a strong real estate market and all that, with commercial properties closing and things like that, that could be affected in the future, not just here, but everywhere. Property tax collections, depending on what happens with the unemployment rate, that could be affected. The economy in general, and then legislative changes. There's always something happening at the legislature that could potentially affect our funding. So, next slide, please. So looking at expenditures overall, we are projecting expenditures to increase annually. Couple of items to note is that the forecast does include opening the new elementary school in fiscal year 23 and a new middle school in fiscal year 24. It also assumes that the current fiscal year 2021 remains in a blended model. Changing operations for 2021 will change assumptions in this forecast. Next slide, please. Not a lot of change between the percentages of the different areas from fiscal year 20 actuals to what we're projecting in fiscal year 25. Next slide, please. So looking at personnel costs, so this is salaries and benefits for our employees. They are projected to be about 76% of total expenditures in the current fiscal year 21. The current year, fiscal year 21, includes adding 12.4 certified positions, full-time equivalent positions, and also one-time costs for the virtual student success coaches that we've added due to the pandemic to help support learning and the teachers. And fiscal year 22 through 25 includes adding 10 certified and 1.5 classified full-time equivalent employees annually for enrollment growth. So depending on what enrollment does, those numbers could be adjusted going forward. The new staff for the new elementary school in fiscal year 23 and new staff for the new middle school in fiscal year 24 is also included in these numbers. Personnel costs for mental health staff, we have shifted those beginning in fiscal year 20 back to the Fund 467 to help offset the lack of increases that we saw in state funding from the biennium budget. And we will be adding those back. This forecast assumes that those costs will come back to the general fund in fiscal year 24 because we anticipate that that funding will remain in place through fiscal year 23. Fiscal year 23 personnel costs are also inflated by approximately $4.5 million, and that is due to the way our pay cycle works. We have 26 pays normally in a fiscal year, but because we pay every other Friday, every now and then it falls, I think every 11 years it falls that we have 27 pays in a single fiscal year. And so that will be the case in fiscal year 23. And then the CARES Act, excuse me, the ESSER funds provides for $2 million in funding. So we've used that to help offset the lack of state funding, the reductions in state funding that we've seen. So we've reduced our expenditures by that amount in the general fund for this year only, and those expenditures will be coming back to the general fund in the next fiscal year, in fiscal year 22, because that is a one-time funding source that we're able to offset the cuts with. Next slide, please. So other expenditures. So these are everything that's based on budgets for buildings and departments, purchase services, supplies and materials, capital outlay, and other objects. Purchase services includes payments to other districts for tuition, special needs, Other students, payments to charter schools, state mandated scholarships, utilities, and other services. Excuse me. This forecast, as far as scholarships are concerned, it does not include any major changes for scholarships beyond what we've seen in trend for increases for those costs. So if the Ed Choice expansion, if that were to look different, that would most definitely change these numbers. The legislature did just recently approve some legislation for Ed Choice, and while we're not happy about it, it doesn't affect us the way it was originally going to at this time. So that's where we're at with that. Materials and supplies includes textbooks, consumable items that don't have a long-term useful life. Capital outlay includes equipment and technology and other items that do have long-term useful lives. And other objects includes substitutes, classroom aids, things like that that we work with the ESC through, and our operating transfers out. We includes our annual transfer to the Permanent Improvement Fund for turf replacement. Next slide, please. So expenditure uncertainty. The current school year and beyond due to the pandemic, we just don't know what that's going to look like if we had a crystal ball, right, Dr. Caldwell? Wouldn't that be nice? Staffing needs, the educational needs of students, economy and inflation, healthcare costs. So this is the same uncertainty that we have every time we go over this. And legislative mandates, an example of that is the Ed Choice expansion. Like I said, we don't anticipate that it will expand as significantly as it once would have based on the legislation that was in place back in the spring. But that's always something that does have the potential to grow depending on what happens. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, isn't it? So, so this is a summary of everything. So beginning balance for the 3 actual years and the 5 forecasted years, total revenues, total expenditures, and then the revenue surplus / deficit. So anything in red there is deficit spending. So we are anticipated to begin deficit spending in the current fiscal year. I don't know necessarily that we'll get there. We'll see where we are in the spring when we come back to update the forecast, because the numbers that are in there are based on budgets and just the way everything is now. So there's a lot of unknowns at this time. The new elementary school is opening in fiscal year 23, new middle school in 24. We are projecting a 15-day unreserved cash balance, a 40-day true cash balance, which is basically what we aim for. The $19 million reserve that we keep in the forecast is the equivalent of about 45 days. So we're still able to meet that 45-day reserve. And just a note there that any future levy plans will depend on the future of state budgets. We receive about 25% of our revenue from the state foundation formula. It's a significant amount. And so we're always looking to see what the state is going to do. And this forecast does assume flat funding through fiscal year 25. So that could look differently depending on how the state budget goes in the new year. Next slide, please. That's all I have. That was long, I know. Sorry. Is everybody still awake?
That was a wonderful report. And I am sure that there are some comments or questions. I think.
Just one about interest income. So I'm going to try to point us to a particular slide, but I don't think we could get there. Can you just talk a little bit? I think everybody knows, interest rates are extremely low, right? But just give us a little bit more of an idea how that impacts us as a district, and sort of what do we have in interest-bearing vehicles and so on like that.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Mrs. Altman. So we can only invest in certain types of investments, basically municipal bonds, notes, things like that. It has to be government-backed securities, and it has to be one of the top 3 highest ratings from the 3 credit bureaus. Rating bureaus, I guess they would be. And so we'll, for example, we'll invest in up to 5 years in a Fannie Mae bond, and that will have a call date on it that it can begin to be called after a particular date. So we might invest in something that has a 3% yield, but then when interest rates drop, they'll call that, and then if we reinvest that money, we're reinvesting it at a much lower yield, which is where we're at right now. I think our Star Ohio account is collecting 0.2% in investments. So there's not a lot to choose from right now. So last year in the general fund, we collected about $2.7 million in interest revenue from our investments. We're projected to collect about $1.1 million this year. So it's a significant reduction. And so that projected going forward as our cash balances decline throughout the forecast. And the feds have come out and said that they don't anticipate raising interest rates for 3 years. And so there's no reason to assume that they would do anything different than to keep them low. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. I think it's helpful just to think about when people hear investments and interest, like just to clarify what kinds of investments we can be in and how interest rates affect us, maybe in some of the same ways, in some different ways.
Right.
People are used to with their personal finances.
Yeah, we also have a lot of investments in CDs too, besides just notes and bonds.
Any other questions for Ms. Marshall? Questions or comments?
Yes, one. So, Ms. Marshall, could you cover for us again how you arrive at the anticipated property tax collection rate, how we get that rate?
It's a great question, Mr. Bell. So in the spring, when everything closed down, we went back and we looked at what our collection rate was during the not during the pandemic, that's where we're at now, during the last recession that we had back in 2008, 2009 through 2012. So at that time, our collection rate, which means the amount that we collect versus what's due for property taxes, was right around 95%. So that was the assumption that we used in the spring. I'm happy to report that based on the settlements that we received this fall, our collection rate has stayed right around 98%. And so that's what we're using going forward. I don't want to make an assumption that we will receive much less revenue than what we're seeing. I think I have nothing to base that on at this point. This is the first time we've been in a pandemic in my lifetime. Hopefully the last. But so that's where I'm using the 98% because that's what we collected this fall in the midst of everything going on. And so we're using that for the current fiscal year, which covers collections in the spring too, the first half collections in the spring for property taxes. So that would be fiscal year 21. And then we're using the same collection rate, 98% in fiscal year 22. We normally collect right around 99%. So there's always delinquencies. We always have property tax delinquencies, but we normally collect right around 99% of what's billed. So the forecast has 98% in fiscal year 21 and 22, and then we have it bumped back up to 99% in 23, 24, and 25.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Not a question, but I wanted to thank you for the amount of time you spent with each of us individually. going over a lot of this information so that we would have it all well digested, if you will, by the time we got to this meeting. I very much appreciate that. As we look forward, I am very concerned. I think your conservative estimates are highly appropriate, and I absolutely support the methodology that you're using. But I think as a community, we need to be very watchful and very concerned about continued effects the pandemic is going to have on state revenues, which of course then cascade to us. And you have flat funding. I know some other districts have not chosen to go flat. They've chosen to put some increase in. I don't think that's necessarily very helpful to us in our thinking, but I want us to be watchful of things, for instance, the casino revenue. If we continue to have slowdowns, if the pandemic were to worsen, we would see those revenues reduce further. At the same time, I want us to be watchful around issues such as ed choice, because it's very easy to, and I'm a little cynical, Rick. I'm not quite as gentle as you are about some legislation. It's easy to be distracted by all that's happening with the pandemic and everything that's going on around that, and lose track of what's happening legislatively around such huge issues as ed choice. Now, I know we're not ignoring that, and I want to also give kudos to you and to Dr. Kellogg for your recent testimony. And I think it might be helpful going forward, every now and then at any rate, to provide information in our district communications around what you have said, because I think it's important for the community to know what is being said, what is being done on behalf of the school district, on behalf of the community, as we advocate for appropriate legislation for our community, our children, our taxpayers. So keep that in mind. Greg D. Brands, if you're watching, which I know you are, it would be good to pluck some of those chunks of testimony so that we all see what's being said and the advocacy that does go on behalf of the school district. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well said, Nancy. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, one more. Could you, or maybe you or Dr. Kellogg briefly speak to one of the things that we are also hearing more about is some persons wanting to request a refund of property taxes that go towards public education because we are in a blended or a remote learning model. Could you speak to that situation? It's connected to the 5-year forecast, but not exactly.
Want me to go first? So first of all, school's still open, so we're still operating. And all of the services that we provide to students are still available. Even when we're in remote, and about the only thing that looks different is really transportation and food service. And in both those cases, we continue to provide services to our community, particularly those families that are high need. As we've talked about before, last spring during the ordered shutdown, we delivered over 250,000 meals, 250,000 meals with the support of our transportation services, our food service. We continue to have to clean buildings, continue to have to clean buses, we continue to have to repair things, continue to teach kids, continue to have to keep the technology infrastructure going. So we are fully engaged and working hard to continue operations, even with the change in modality. And I think even the recognition through both the state and the federal government, where we have been provided additional funds because of the recognition that schools are still running, I think is testimony to the statement that we are still operating schools. And in some ways, this is more challenging than what we normally do, and more challenging often means more resources, including money, in order to make them run. As for example, Ms. Marshall mentioned our investment in our success coaches. has been a piece of that. We heard loud and clear from folks last spring that when kids are in remote, it's sometimes challenging for them and trying to keep them connected to school, and we continue to face that challenge. Continue to bring those folks in as part of our model to help. And so in some ways it becomes more burdensome to provide services when you're doing it in a way that you're not really built well for doing. So I would say that's where I would look at it. And Ms. Marshall may have more to add.
No, I think Dr. Kellogg explained it well. So, you know, while we're seeing significant cuts in our state funding, we're still continuing to provide services to our students. And like he said, school is open. And we actually have significant added costs in operating because of the pandemic. So, yeah, that would be my answer to anyone that would ask that question.
Thank you both.
Like that, just one other piece about the cuts, if I might. And so if I see it wrong, correct me, Nicole, but I want you to take a look at the FY19 state funding amount of $44.73 million. And then the current amount, which includes the cut of, which is now 41.95. Here's my point. Anything moving forward that is an increase, is it on top of the 41.95 or is it on top of the 44.73? And traditionally, it's been on the lower of the two amounts. So the differential, my quick math was about 7%. So even a 3% increase by the state isn't really an increase. It's keeping us away from where we were. And I think if you take a look at that 41.95 number and went back in our forecast and looked at actual state revenues from the past, that number is closer to something we got several years ago. So we've gone backwards, and then we're hopeful to go forward. This is part of the problem with not having a funding formula. These changes are difficult to predict. They are difficult to communicate to your community, and they have underlying ripple effects over time. This is not one time. This has an additive effect on our finances moving forward. And when you look at our deficits, any deficit spending, these things fluctuate based a lot on that number. And our community has been very supportive, very generous in recent times to our bottom line, and we're appreciative of that. We'll work hard to make that work. This state piece is critical, and the window of opportunity is very, very short. If it changes, if we don't get this done before this legislative changes, we are back at step one with trying to find new sponsors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that will just slow down at a time period, and we're headed towards the next biannual budget. So that's the urgency of the moment that I know Ms. Marshall and I feel, as well as superintendents and boards of education and treasurers across the state.
And thank you, Dr. Kellogg, for adding that, and Ms. Marshall, for both of you sharing. I must pick up on one thing that you said, Ms. Marshall, and I think Dr. Kellogg, you referenced it as well. I am just now speaking for me. I don't know that I have seen a group of people work harder than our staff and teachers in this COVID season. When you're trying to teach group A and you still need to care and provide for group B. And there's a WVA out there, and you're getting emails and communication from A, B, and WVA. And I'm not going to go into all that, but I know that there's a respect level that this board has, and I would say administration has, for the yo person job that our staff and teachers are doing in a season of Thanksgiving. We truly are thankful for what you're doing, and know that it is beyond anything you thought you were going to do when you signed up for education as your career. So tremendously thankful. Ms. Marshall, again, the way you explain this to us over and over and over again, and then when I call you again and say, I still don't understand it, you patiently explain it once again. And I know I speak for the board now, we are so grateful for the amount of work that you have given to this, but to helping us in our role be caregivers for the community's taxes as well. So thank you from me. Anything else, I don't want to dominate that. And I have a fly on my screen here, so excuse me. Sorry. I'm lost here now. Yes, thank you. Is there a please? Oh yes, please call the roll. There he goes.
Ms. Davidson,
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker,
Yes.
Ms. Saltman,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 9.02, a resolution to approve the purchases in accordance with ORC 5705.41 D1 and board policy 6320. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you so much. Ms. Marshall, do you want to explain this to us?
Yes, President Velardo, members of the board, thank you. So this is what we affectionately call then and now purchase order. What this means is that we have an invoice that is dated prior to a purchase order date. So this is caused by a tournament account that was late getting set up for the Ohio Capitol Conference. So this is something that we host for the Ohio Capitol Conference, not an actual district expenditure, but we're a pass-through for those expenses. And so that's why this is a then and now purchase order, because the appropriations hadn't been approved yet and the timing of everything.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Dr. Nesterbaker,
Yes.
Ms. Saltman,
Yes.
Ms. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, 9.03, excuse me, a motion and a second to approve the financial report and investments for October 2020. A motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you so much. Ms. Marshall?
Thank you, President Velardo, members of the board. So this month we are going over October 31 month end. So we had year-to-date, for the general fund, we had year-to-date receipts of $72.3 million, year-to-date expenditures of $63.1 million, and we ended with an unencumbered fund balance of $128.9 million. And that's for the general fund. For all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $93.8 million, year-to-date expenditures of $84.1 million, and an unencumbered fund balance for all funds of $262.2 million. And just a reminder, we do have construction funds that from the bond issue that are included in those amounts.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you so much. 9.04, a motion and a second, resolution to approve fund-to-fund transfer, Capital Improvement Fund 003 to Debt Service Fund 002 in the amount of $2,926,375, and from the General Fund 001 to the Turf Replacement Fund 0049004 in the amount of $65,000. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Thank you very much. Ms. Marshall, any comments on this one?
These are just the annual transfers that we do for the tax anticipation note payment and then the turf replacement fund.
Thank you very much. Any question, comments? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. 9.05, amending the fiscal year 2021 annual appropriations. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Ms. Marshall?
Just, we are updating the annual appropriations to account for the changes with the 5-year forecast in the general fund. And then we have a couple of new grants and some additional allocations, budget allocations.
This is aligning with the 5-year forecast you just did, right?
The general fund, yes.
Do you want to go over that 5-year forecast again? Make sure we're
I'm
good?
happy to. Anybody that wants to listen.
Okay, any questions or comments? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nussbaker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. 9.06, a motion and a second to approve the new USAS funds. Motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Marshall, I know you want to explain this one a little bit, right?
Yes, thank you, President Velardo, members of the board. So USAS stands for the Uniform School Accounting System. So our auditors, as part of their review, they're still working on this year's audit, but they are recommending as a best practice, not required, but they are recommending as a best practice that the board approve any new funds. So we have a new fund for the coronavirus relief funds and a new fund for the ESSER funds, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Act. Those are both provided for under the CARES Act funding. So funds 507 and 510. The board has already approved appropriations for these funds based on the grants that we've received. So this is just a matter of formality that the board actually approved the creation of those funds.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions on that? I don't think so. Yes, please call the roll.
Dr. Nussbaker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Ms. Marshall, I think you're off the hook for a few minutes here anyway. Moving on, agenda item 10, personnel consent agenda 10.01 through 10.12. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hopkins, are you on the line and would you like to share with us?
Yes, I am. Good evening, President Velardo, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall. I'd like to present for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. I'd really like to focus on some of the retirements this evening that are on tonight's agenda. We actually have 8 of them. First, starting with Ms. Charlotte Tackett. She's retiring from her custodial position over at Longfellow, which is effective January 1st, 2021. She's provided Westerville with 29 years of service. We also have this evening 7 licensed staff members who are retiring at the end of the school year in May of 2021. Our first retiree is Annette Chrisman. Annette's retiring from her reading position at Hamby Elementary School, and she is leaving with 15 years of service to the Westerville community. Karen Garrison is retiring from her PE teaching position at Mark Twain. She has provided Westerville with 35 years of service. Patricia Halls, also retiring from her teaching position, this time at Hawthorne Elementary School. She has provided Westerville with 16 years of service. Thomas Markle, a counselor at Walnut Springs Middle School, is retiring after 20 years of service in the Westerville community. Carol Smith is retiring from her teaching position at Walnut Springs, effective at the end of the year. She's provided Westerville with 23 years of service. Mary Beth Tice is going to be retiring from her position, another one from Mark Twain, who's retiring. She's provided Westerville with 19 years of service. And finally, Miss Kimberly Weeks. Kimberly is retiring from her teaching position at Mark Twain. She has provided Westerville with 34 years of service, So if you add it all up, we are just under 200 years of service to the Westerville community that we are so internally grateful for, all of them. And with respect to employment, after losing a few of these folks that we need to employ, so we do have 16 individuals being recommended for employment to a variety of classified positions. We have one teacher being recommended for a replacement teaching contract. Happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Any questions for Dr. Hopkins? Any comments?
I do have a comment, and you know I always comment on the retirements because it always, no matter how many spring times and fall times come around when those retirements roll through, seems to happen at certain chunks of the year, it's always so bittersweet, and it's always amazing to see the names on the list. My gosh, how did they get to be retirement age? It always surprises me. But tonight I want to comment on our Mark Twain teacher, Mary Beth Tice. She also happens to be my grandson's teacher, and she is truly remarkable. I have known that family for some time, and they are incredible people in good times and bad times. And it's been a joy to know that my little grandson has been able to experience the joy of that particular teacher. So I want to congratulate all of our retirees, even though I think, Paul, there has to be a mistake in the way you've calculated the years because it just can't be. But thank you to all of them. And the joy that I feel about Mary Beth Tice, I feel for all of you. So thank you very much.
Well said, Nancy. Any others?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, right? When you add up all those years. And I think what we all recognize is how much every one of those retirees touches so many lives over the years. And sometimes we're in a position to call out how it touches our family, but we know that they do that for families all over the district. And I just have to say that Karen Garrison probably doesn't remember this, but she was my 7th grade basketball coach. So congratulations, Miss Garrison. I'm super happy for you. Right? Thank you for your, I think, 35 years of service. That was probably like 32 years ago. So, but thank you to all of you. Just fantastic work, and you've changed people's lives. So thanks.
How could she not remember you on the hardwoods out there? I'm sure. Thank you. Really, we are just so thankful for all that you all have done. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 10.11.01. I didn't skip anything, did I? No. Thank you. I just thought I did for a second there. 11.01, final reading, policy 2270, religion in the curriculum. A motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. This is our final reading. You all have had plenty of chance to look at this. Are there any final questions or comments you have before we vote? Hearing none, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 11.02, final reading, policy 6325, procurement, federal grants and funds revised by, or this is revised, final reading. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Again, a final reading, but do you have any questions or comments at this point for this? Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 12.01, or excuse me, new business, we have none. Agenda item 13, recommended action, standing business, 13.01, donations. May I have a motion and a second to accept these donations?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you very much. We are abundantly grateful for everything this community does in their support of our students and staff, and not the least of which are the donations which continue to come in and impact the people in this school district. So a thank you to every organization and every individual that goes above and beyond, because that's what a donation is, above and beyond. Thank you very much. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nestabaker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 13, recommended actions, 13.02. Resolution, a motion and a second, resolution approving schematic design stage submission, LFI MOU for the new middle school included in the ELPP project. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Is Mr. Dorn going to speak to this? Is this something, Mr. Dorn, are you out there you want to share with us, or Ms. Davidson?
President Velardo, I'm ready to.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Good evening again, President Velardo, Vice President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. The resolution presented here is for the approval of the schematic design, which is the conception phase, planning phase for the new middle school project. The design development, which is the detailing phase, and the construction document phases will follow at future board meetings. As this project is part of our expedited local partnership program project with the OFCC, it is required for the board to approve each phase of the design. The design first goes to the OFCC's regional program consultant for review for compliance with the OFCC's Ohio School Design Manual and identification of the locally funded initiatives before coming to the board for approval. This project has met the OFCC standards and is now before you. It is being recommended that the board approve the schematic design submission stage for the new middle school project, authorize the superintendent and treasurer to sign the locally funded initiative memorandum of understanding, document completed by the OFCC's RPC for the schematic design stage submission for the new middle school, and authorize the design team to continue with preparation of the design development stage documents for the new middle school project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorn. Any other comments for Mr. Dorn at this point? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Dr. Nestabaker,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 13.03, superintendent's contract. May I have a motion and a second to adopt the terms of the contract reviewed by the Board of Education for Dr. John Kellogg for the period August 1, 2021 through July 31, 2024. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments at this time?
I have some comments, yeah, if you don't mind, thank you. Excuse me. As you're all aware, right, I joined this board in January, right before COVID hit. And so it's been interesting, to say the least, to try to get my bearings as a board member under these circumstances, and I take these decisions very seriously. So, you know, I just want to share that on this particular issue, I've worked really hard to listen and be in conversation through the contract process, and I really appreciate give and take on all sides through these conversations. You know, and the conclusion that I've arrived at is that I'm probably in a different spot than the majority of the board members. So I think that's okay. I really do think that's okay. You all know I'm a history buff, so I don't know if this is the right time to invoke Lincoln's cabinet, but in any case, the idea that sometimes people work hard together and don't end up on quite the same page, I'm okay with that. And I think history has some really good lessons for us there. So the gist is that for me is that in these really extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in, I would have preferred a package where we're waiting on some pieces of increase of, various parts of the package for the superintendent. I was hopeful maybe it would be a sort of a one-year contract to get us through this pandemic, and maybe we could be back at the table in a year before we look at some of the increases. But that's not where the majority of the board lands. And again, I really think that's okay. I think we end up stronger through these conversations. And so I acknowledge that I'm probably an outlier amongst my colleagues tonight on where I am with this package. And so for these reasons, I plan to abstain from this vote. And I want people to understand that abstaining I've taken this very seriously. It's not an abdication of my vote, but I am finding this as a middle ground to acknowledge my gratitude for the give and take on all sides through this process in a really difficult time. And as a new board member who just had literally a couple of meetings before this pandemic hit. So I acknowledge I'm trying to get my bearings and was not able to get to the same place on the superintendent's contract that the majority of the board was able to get to. So I truly look forward to working as a team. I really mean that. I really think it's okay if we're not always landing exactly the same place. And so I just wanted to share those thoughts before we go into the vote so that people have that context and what's on my mind. But I want to thank everybody for the process and, look forward to moving forward, doing great work in the future together. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Altman. I appreciate that. Any other comments or questions?
Yes. When I first went on the board, Jen, someone that meant a lot to me said, you have three choices in your votes. You can vote yes, you can vote no, and you can abstain. We all know what yes and no mean. And the only time it's reasonable to abstain, assuming not a conflict of interest, is for the need for more information. And I think that as you were talking and as I was thinking about the extraordinary time that you chose to come on the board, I think you fall very clearly into that abstain, need more information piece, need more information phase, because the time period that you have been on the board is unlike any other time period. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness and I understand where you're coming from. And I just heard that person's voice in my head while you were talking, yes, no, or need more information. So as time goes by, you'll have more information. And that's certainly appropriate. So for me, I'm looking at having plenty of information for me and consistency and stability and an understanding of the job that's been accomplished, not just during the pandemic, but over a series of years, and watching that carefully and thinking about where the district was, changes that have occurred, are still occurring, and changes that I see coming in the future, and the person that I believe should be at the helm for that. I do think it's Dr. Kellogg. I think based on a lot of the conversations I have, and people do have plenty of disparate opinions as they do of any leader. And in talking to people in this district and also talking to Dr. Kellogg's peers, which he probably doesn't know I do, but talking to Dr. Kellogg's peers and talking to people in other school districts, I am very much aware of the respect that is held for the leadership of this district in our superintendent and our treasurer, and the sense that as so much is falling down around our ears, or feels like it is right now, that even though we sometimes take a step wrong, we sometimes don't do what we need to do in the way some people want us to, in the end, Westerville stands and will come out of this, will come out strong. And the only reason that happens is because of the people who work for the school district. And that's everyone who works for the school district. And Rick, you were talking so eloquently about the thanks we owe and the respect we hold our employees in. And for me, that is everyone at every level, up through and including the superintendent. I am deeply grateful for all that has gone on here recently, and I am even more grateful for all that has gone on in past years. What we're talking about tonight with superintendent's contract, actually, after what I just said, you would think we were going to bump John Kellogg, or voting to bump him to the highest paid superintendent in Franklin County. But we're not. So we are still holding firm in the middle of the pack in Franklin County. And that seems to me to be appropriate and prudent, not just for John Kellogg, but for our district going forward as we look to the type of talent that's attracted here and the type of talent that this district has been built on. So for those reasons, I fully support extending the contract and the provisions of the contract. It makes sense to me, and it falls within the realm of what I've seen, what I've heard, and what I understand.
Thank you, Nancy. Any other comments or questions at this point? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Abstain.
Mrs. Davidson.
I'm going to expand on my vote. As everyone knows up here, this was a very hard decision for me. As a voice of the community, and at this time, I cannot support a 3-year contract extension, the changes in the contract language, or the fiscal implications it has for this district. Therefore, my vote is no.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. I vote yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 13.04, resolution to approve the adoption of a pickup plan. Now, when I was in high school, if somebody would have said something about, I'm sorry, I shouldn't go down that road. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
I stunned you all that you just didn't know where to go with that. It is an unusual name, what we have here. And I'm going to read the resolution. But Ms. Marshall, would you mind explaining to the community why this is a necessary resolution? I mean, it's tied to administrators, the retirement system, STRS. And so they're requiring it. Could you give a quick explanation of that?
Yes, President Velardo, members of the board. So the state teachers retirement system, which Dr. Kellogg's contract falls under, requires that any change in the plan for the pickup of the employee contributions to the retirement system, that the board approve a separate and distinct resolution stating such. Even though his contract language that the board just approved includes the exact same language. The retirement system, as of July 1st, it was a change in their interpretation in the Internal Revenue Code and how compensation is treated. So the change in the plan requires a separate resolution, which is what's before you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted people to know that this was an STRS requirement, needed to do this. And what they're saying is, well, based on IRS code, you really should do this as a resolution. So I'll read the resolution. Be it resolved, effective July 1, 2021, the Westerville City School District Board of Education agrees to pick up 10% of the employee contributions required by Section 3307.26 revised code to be contributed to the superintendent to STRS Ohio. Westerville City School District Board of Education is permitted to pick up employee contributions pursuant to Sections 3307.27 revised code and Section 414H2 of the IRS code. These These picked up contributions, although designated as employee contributions, are being paid by the Westerville City School District Board of Education in lieu of employee contributions and shall be paid by the board as a fringe benefit in addition to the contract salary otherwise payable to the employee. These contributions shall be treated as additional compensation and included in salary for retirement purposes. The superintendent may not opt out of the picked up contributions or elect to receive the contributed amounts directly instead of having them picked up by the Westerville City School District Board of Education and paid to STRS Ohio. That is the resolution before you. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Abstain to align with my
Mrs.
previous.
Davidson,
No.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to public comments that have been submitted. Now, I need to go to my email because I believe that's where the comments have been submitted. Is that correct, behind the scenes people?
Correct.
Thank you very much. Go to my email. Pardon me, smoke them if you got them. I shouldn't have said that. I'm going to get an email on that. Okay. Combined, thank you, Mr. V. Brantz. Okay, I'm going to read through these. We want people to know that we received these. We take these seriously, and if there are requests for some kind of response, etc., you will be receiving that response separately. From Rebecca Diem, I strongly urge the administration to remain in the blended model for the weeks December 7 and December 7 and December 14. These are crucial opportunities to each cohort of students to have at least 1 week of in-person learning with their teachers prior to the end of the semester. As you said yourself, school-age children are a small percentage of cases in our district, and data points to schools being one of the safer environments for them. While we are seeing positive cases in our schools from community spread, we are not seeing spread in our schools. We are not seeing quarantining from classroom or school contact. Please follow the science, not emotional responses, and allow our children to stay in the classroom. And I know some of this we have talked about and dealt with and so on, but these are comments that are coming in. Thank you for that comment. Rachel Kincaid, I believe is the name. Westerville City Schools has done an amazing job keeping our children safe. And we've heard from numerous medical professionals and politicians how important it is for children to be physically in school. Please allow them to go back to blended learning after December 4. Also, extracurricular activities are so important to children's mental and physical well-being. It gives them a sense of purpose and belonging, and thus far the students have been very careful with very little issues. Just looking at the quarantine and infected numbers in the school district, the percentage is low against the full student population. Thank you for taking comments. Thank you for that comment, and you're welcome. We appreciate comments coming in. This is from Craig Will. Keep kids in school, no remote. Keep kids in school, no remote. Thank you, Mr. Will. From Jennifer Eby, I ask that you consider sending the kids back to school in their last 2 weeks in December. Our pediatricians have told us that our children need to be in school. Studies have told us they need to be in school as they aren't the spreaders. So, quote, despite the data, end quote, and keeping them home isn't good enough. We need to do better for them. The system used to determine the color we have moved to is flawed. I'm assuming she is referring to the state's color system. The system used to determine the color we have moved to is flawed. For example, listing a death before onset of symptoms. For example, listing a death before onset of symptoms. Yes, I read that right. This is the kind of data driving the system. Data is available on the COVID-19 dashboard for all of us to access. Listen to the people working in the hospitals. Yes, they are busy because they are understaffed, furloughed, quarantined, or sick, not because of the lack of beds available. Please do not allow our children to suffer in this mess any more than they have to. Listen to the parents, listen to your administrators in the building, and listen to the kids. That is where they need to be. Yes, staffing is an issue. Yes, teachers may have to cover another class and sacrifice their free period. We are all making sacrifices here, but the health and well-being of our children is not a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Thank you very much. Jennifer Eby. And from next one is Paul Eby. It should be taken into consideration that all students and parents have a choice in how they or their children are educated during our current climate. It should not be that only those interested in receiving virtual instruction have a choice to do so, which they should have that choice. But those needing in-class instruction should also have a choice to receive 100% in person, in the classroom, in the school, building learning with their peers. Countless health experts and countless studies can be cited that we are doing a disservice to the kids in our community by not allowing them to be in school. I would ask that more serious consideration be given to allowing kids to have the choice to be in school. Thank you very much, Paul. Amy Thompson. Hello, Amy. Hello, I just want to say how important I think it is for the kids to go back to in-person learning for the remainder of the school year. We've done the blended learning model and we've done 100% virtual learning. I think at this point we know how to remain safe, and we know that children are not super spreaders of this environment, of this virus. Losing this much in-person instruction is worse for our kids than the virus itself. Yes, I read that sentence correctly. It's time to go back to normal. Kids deserve a free public education and they are not getting it. It is time for families to take the information they have and decide for themselves what is the best option. It seems the families who choose the WVA get their choice, but the families who want an all-in education are not getting their choice. Please consider this. Thank you. Thank you, Amy, Amy Thompson, for that comment. We've talked about some of this. I don't think I will rehash what we have said previously and what Dr. Kellogg went over in his superintendent's report. I would not agree with some of what has been said in these comments, and I would agree with some of what has been said. And I think that's how I will respond to those comments at this point. Board comments, 15.01. May I not have a motion in a second? Sorry, lost my head there for a minute. Who would like to begin? Normally I begin alphabetically, and I don't want to break my record, so Ms. Altman, I'm just going to begin with you because I need a break.
That was some good fast talking there, President Velardo.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Altman.
I want to just keep it brief and say just thank you to everybody. There's so much pivoting this year. It's hard. We know that. I know that with my own kids, and everybody's in a different situation. So thank you for all the pivoting. And I just, am so appreciative of our award-winning teachers and staff. They do fantastic work every day. They're doing fantastic work in this environment. And anyway, really appreciate the people who nominated them too, because it takes some time to do that. And then finally, everybody, please just stay safe. Do your best, stay safe. It's a hard year. So I think that's probably it. Thank you.
Excellent. Very important. Reverend Bell, I think alphabetically you're next.
Thank you, President Velardo. A few things once again. Would like to congratulate all of the A+ winners. Thank you for all of the tremendous work that you do. I would also like to, fingers crossed, wish good luck to the staff at South High School. We're hopeful that everything will go well, so you all will be able to transition into the new space and begin the next season at South High School. I would like to also remind members of the public of the boundary realignment process. The portal is open to receive comments and feedback, so please visit our website, take a look at the proposed plans and changes, and submit your feedback to us. This is Thanksgiving week, and so I would just like to take a moment to share just a little bit of what I am thankful for. First of all, I'm thankful for all of the staff and administrators, all of our teachers. Thank you all so very much for all that you do in helping to educate our children in this district. We appreciate you more than words can express. And so during this week of Thanksgiving, I would just like to let you know that at least I am very thankful for each and every one of you. I would also just like to let each of you know, Mrs. Altman, Mrs. Davidson, Dr. Nestor Baker, President Velardo, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, very thankful to be able to serve in this capacity alongside each of you. So thank you all for all that you say and for all that you do. And finally, please, I want to wish everyone a very safe and happy Thanksgiving holiday. And just a quick reminder, as Mrs. Altman has alluded to before, the 3 W's, please remember: wash your hands, wear your mask, and watch your distance. Please be mindful that what we do over the course of the next several days will dictate and determine how we wind up finishing this semester in the school year. So please remember the 3 W's and have a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Reverend Bell. Ms. Davidson?
You know, Vaughn, that was beautiful, and I agree with every single word you said, exactly, so I'm not going to repeat it. I do have an addition. I'm super excited to announce a new initiative from Westerville Education Challenge. It is our CERC page. It stands for Social Emotional Resource Center, which everyone right now can probably use. There are resources on there for a deeper awareness to mental health issues and social emotional self-regulation skills. So I encourage everyone to go to the Westerville Education Challenge.com. Tomorrow it will be launched new, and check it out. And thank you very much, and everyone have a Thanksgiving, or a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much.
Well, you know, sometimes I always actually liked having the name Nestor in school because it meant that I figured out what everybody was going to talk about before they got to me, and I still had a chance to talk before everything had been said by the rest of the people. But tonight, here I am, except for you, bringing up the tail end of the thanks. And at first I was thinking, you know, it's not fair to have a pastor speak before the rest of us. It's just not. But that being said, I too want to offer my thanks. This is a Thanksgiving, unlike other Thanksgivings for many of us. Not all of us, but for many of us. But even in the differences, there are still so very many things to be thankful for. And as I think about the school district itself, I jotted down a few things, and I could make a list as long as this table and as wide as this room, and still come up with more things to be thankful for that go on in this district day after day after day. But I am thankful for, as Vaughn said, and as was echoed, everyone here at this table and everyone that we interact with all the time. I am so thankful for the Herculean efforts of all of our teachers and all of our staff during these what have felt like endless months as we try to do the very best we possibly can for the children of this district. Truly, truly thankful for that. I'm thankful for concrete things, literal concrete things, like spaces at South and the ability the community has given us to build new buildings. I'm deeply thankful for that as well. I'm thankful for all of the people in this community who do so much for all of the children of this community, whether they are children who live in their homes or other people's children. It's a wonderful thing to see all of the efforts that go forward here to take care of the younger ones. That's a sign of a wonderful, thankful, compassionate community. And that is this particular community. And I guess most of all, as I think about it tonight, I am thankful that, as my grandmother always used to say, God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll all be back together. That is truly a reason to be thankful. And with that, I'll turn it over to the other pastor.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. I appreciate all the comments that have been shared. Really just the affirming of the A+ award winners. Dr. Kellogg was right. We had a record number of people nominated this year, and I was fortunate to be able to read through those nominations, and every blessed one of them deserved the A+ award. But we can't give them to everyone. So thankful for that. And I would just affirm, Vaughn, that there's something to be grateful for when you can serve on a board like this and a community like this, and recognize that we're not always going to see eye to eye. We're not always going to affirm each other's vote, but we can affirm each other as people who take seriously what we are trying to do, and trusting one another is important. I'm grateful for Ms. Marshall and Dr. Kellogg and the team that they have forged together in doing the work that we are doing in this year of COVID. And as far as it's sometimes hard, and I'm not going to go too far in this, but it's sometimes hard to be I recognize, to be thankful when there is so much going on. But I would say to the community that if there is anything in your life that is true, if there is anything in your life that is noble or pure, if there is anything in your world that is lovely and admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy, my hope is that that's what you'll focus on during this Thanksgiving season. What we do have instead of what we wish we had. So thank you for being with us tonight. Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, a little bit of an unusual time of board comments. Would the two of you like to share anything? You don't have to, I'm just asking.
Thank you, President Velardo. Members of the board, I think you all know how thankful I am just to be in this community and be with the school district, and my role as the treasurer. And I'm also thankful for everyone sitting up here tonight. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks for all the service of the various board members, for all the work that you do to our community. Thank you for bringing me into this community, making me feel part of this community, and all of the wonderful resources that we have here. It is the envy of Central Ohio, I can tell you that. So appreciate being here. Appreciate all the work that you're doing on behalf of our students and our staff and our community. To our students and staff out there, rest up, stay healthy. Let's get back at it as we head towards 2021.
2021. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Moving on, agenda item 16, time the board will meet in a virtual hybrid meeting Monday, December 14 at 6 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. Agenda item 17, 17.01, motion and a second to go into executive session for the purpose of considering the compensation and employment of a public employee. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion, questions? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Dr. Nussbaker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, we will now go into executive session in a different location in the building, just a different room. My understanding is that the camera will be continuing, so I ask all the board members to not say anything negative about the board president at this time. We will adjourn from the executive session. Thank you all very much.
We will come back. We'll be back in here to adjourn.
We will be back in here to adjourn, so if you would like to stay on the computer,
We'll have a picture up that says we're in executive session during this time.
we're going to do a picture that up says we're in executive session. What is the picture of?
Just a little slide that says we're,
Okay, I'm done now. We're going to executive session.
yeah, everybody mute your microphones.
Thank you very much. Back from executive session. May I have a motion and a second to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions or discussion, Ms. Altman? Hearing none. Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson? Yes. Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor-Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes, we are adjourned.
9:24.